Maniacs, welcome back to the channel, your local bedhead here. Today we are going to be diving into another dead meat video, and I really do love dead meat. Watching him has been nothing but a treat ever since I started a couple years ago, and ever since I've just been really wanting to do more reactions, but unfortunately we just don't get enough likes on these reactions, so if you guys want to see more dead meat reactions, all you have to do is hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, but mainly hit that like button. Try to get this video up to about 100 likes, and I will continue to do dead meat reactions. Now this one should be interesting. This is called Amityville, the true story behind a true story. Production Tales from Hell. So this is not about the real story of the Amityville Horror, but it's actually about the making of the movie, the Amityville Horror. I know for a fact there are like shit tons of stories about sets being cursed and haunted while in the making of certain movies. One of the biggest ones is The Exorcist. I'm not 100% sure if I believe in the real story of the Amityville Horror, just with all the stuff that's surrounding it. I've already heard rumors and speculations that the Lutzs family were not that honest, specifically George Lutz, where apparently he was bragging that he is the Amityville guy, and he liked that. It just feels too much like it was a situation where they knew what they had and they took complete advantage of it. They knew they were moving into a haunted location or a house that had such a history, and not even that long ago kind of history. Like, this only took place like a year after, right? I think when they finally moved into the house, like a couple years after, when the DeFeo family had their tragic comeuppance or happenings. Yeah, and then they kind of come out with like all these paranormal stories and crazy things were going on in the house. And you know what? Maybe there was some paranormal stuff going on. I certainly don't know myself, and the house has not been investigated for a long time. So for all we know, the house could be haunted. But for me, it just sounds like they probably faked most of it. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and dive into this video. I don't know too much about the issues on set with making the movie, so that should be fascinating to find out. But again, guys, hit the like button, and we're gonna go ahead and dive into this. And I'll pause it when I want to talk, because I don't want to talk over James. I have too much respect for him. So here we go.
It's the passage to hell.
The murders at 112 Ocean Avenue forever changed the history of a small Long Island suburb. On the night of November 13th, 1974, 6 people were killed in an unassuming house. 1 year later, a young couple moved into the same home with their 3 children. And 28 days after that, they fled from the house, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal phenomena. This claim would spark a best-selling book and a film that would break the box office records, The Amityville Horror. But was it a lie? A hoax to profit off of a real tragedy? And were the visionaries behind the film involved in this deception? Today, we're exploring all of that on this episode of Production Tales from Hell.
Pretty cool. Can't wait. Alrighty then. Dead Meat presents. I'm liking it. I like the feel. Production Tales from Hell.
Hey everyone, it's your Twisted Woman here, Chauncey K. Robinson, and welcome to Production Tales from Hell.
Hi,
where we
Chauncey.
dive into all the fire and brimstone it took to make the horror films we know and love, and in some cases, the darkness that followed their releases. In this episode, we'll be focusing on one of the most controversial films of its time, The Amityville Horror, 1979. There are 5 circles of film hell: development, production, post-production, distribution, and perhaps the most dreaded, limbo. The Amityville Horror is something of a special case. The development of this film, its very foundation, if you will, is one steeped in controversy and maybe even corruption. It's sprung from real-life gruesome murders. The heart of this movie rests in blood. There were a few hiccups when it came to production, but the real demons have to do with the film's legacy after it was released. The storm of lawsuits and damning accusations would call into question everything from the movie's purpose to the honesty of the people at the heart of this paranormal tale. Flies, lies, and breaking ties marred this classic film. But before breaking ties, let's talk about our tie to this show's partner, WeTransfer.
Well, before we get into your sponsor, I have to go ahead and tell you that I actually do have the book, The Amityville Horror, and I've thought about reading it. I'm not sure if I will. There's a reason why behind that, and this is something that I'm very much confident is very known. Basically, to my knowledge, don't quote me on this, the author of that book self-admitted to adding a bunch of made-up shit for the sake of making the story way more scary than just what the Lutz family were telling them. And I must be honest, there's a possibility that some of the things that they were talking about could have happened in the house. It could have happened, for all I know. I don't know. And this took place back in the 70s, so it's not like, we can try to investigate or do something that would help, further the proof of what was going on, right? No one's allowed in that house from my knowledge. There were some things that kind of made you think about it a little bit, and certain things that I'm pretty sure I heard that George Lutz hated the remake of the Amityville Horror because it was almost insulting the real story, what he felt was the real story. So you have to look at things like that too. That would be like, you know what, that's kind of interesting. Because I will be honest with you, if we're talking about movies, the remake of the Amityville Horror, in my personal opinion, is a bit scarier than the original film. It's one of those moments where it's like the remake actually was kind of scarier. It was bullshit. Obviously, most of the stuff that happened in those movies never even happened. Especially where, like, the remake added in that psycho who slit his own throat. Like, he would torture Indians on the property and stuff. It was just all made up for the sake of the story. It was all BS. They wanted to add more context into that. In the original film where, like, they tried to break through the brick wall because there was something on the other side, and in the remake there was actually something on the other side, and it was like just a bunch of doors that led into different rooms where they would use to torture Indians and stuff. Made up shit, but it was still creepy. In a movie, it would have been creepy. It's the fact that it's supposed to be based on a true story is just kind of insulting to the real story and everybody involved. I mean, we got to look past it a little bit. There was a family that was brutally murdered. A family lost their lives. And we got to, take that for what it is. It's heartbreaking. The kids got killed. Insult that memory by making up bullshit. Get back into that. Sorry.
The Amityville Horror is
Dope.
a 1979 supernatural film that claims to be based on a true story. It focuses on a married couple, George and Kathy Lutz, and their young children who move into a house in Amityville, New York. A year prior to their move, a young husband had killed his entire family in the same home. Strange happenings begin occurring soon after they move in, with something violent and supernatural haunting the home. George is the most affected and descends into madness, pushed on by some invisible dark force. Meanwhile, Kathy is left trying to figure out what's causing this danger before it's too late. Starring James Brolin, Margot Kidder, and Rod Steiger, the film was directed by Stuart Rosenberg with a screenplay based on the book by J. Anson. The Amityville Horror was a major box office success. It grossed over $80 million and broke records as one of the highest-grossing independent films of all time. Perhaps the movie could have stood as a testament to the power of horror stories, or even a nod to the idea that there is something beyond the mundane world. But that isn't where this story ends. This house's story begins with an evil deed. On a fall night in 1974, 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. ran into a bar in Amityville, screaming that a mob hitman had come into his home and killed his family. DeFeo went back to the home with a number of people from the bar, and the police were called. It was discovered that DeFeo's parents, along with his siblings, ages 9 to 18, had been shot dead as they slept in their beds. Initially speaking with the police, DeFeo stuck with his story that a mob hitman named Louis Fellini had...
Yeah, which also goes to show that, and it kind of is cool that they're actually telling you a little bit of the factual stuff. This guy changed his story so much. He changed it so much. And he's passed away now. I think he passed away a couple of years ago. Wasn't even that long ago when he passed away. I think it was like 2019, 2018 when he passed away. So yeah, not long ago at all. And his story changed. It differed. At one point he said that, mob member came in and killed his family. Then he said somebody gave him the rifle. He started saying that he heard voices in his head. I mean, you don't really know what to believe at this point. And I certainly wouldn't trust a word the guy says, because the guy obviously has issues, and he just does not make sense.
Killed his family. Upon further questioning, though, due to inconsistencies in his story, the young man confessed to killing his parents and siblings. DeFeo's lawyers, among them William Weber, would have their client claim innocence by reason of insanity. DeFeo gave testimony that he had heard his family's voices plotting against him on the night.
Yeah, I remember that one.
When he looked around and found no one there, he assumed that God was speaking to him. Speculation then spread that the voices he heard were the result of the house being haunted. while other theories surmise that DeFeo, an admitted heroin and LSD user, had been under the influence before killing his family. Despite this claim of insanity, the jury found DeFeo guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced him to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. This was on December 4th, 1975. 2 weeks later, a young family moved into the home where the murders occurred. It's important to point out that by the end of this trial, the idea of 112 Ocean Avenue being haunted was not a prevalent belief. That wouldn't happen until George and Kathy Lutz entered the picture. 28 days after moving into Ocean Avenue, the Lutz family fled.
I think with him being on drugs, he definitely was on drugs, and he definitely had influence from the drugs on why he did what he did. Now, the interesting part about this whole situation is that there was no sign of struggle. The family were all shot in bed, and nobody got out of bed to check what was going on. Nobody made any movements. There was no sign of fighting. There was no sign of running. There was no sign of anything. They were all still lying in their beds. Now, the question is, how the hell did nobody hear the gunshots? Right? Not even the neighbors heard the gunshots. How does nobody hear the gunshots and nobody do anything? Because at this point, I think anybody could hear gunshots. Hell, I hear when something falls in one of my siblings' room. If someone's shooting a gun off in the house about 5-6 times before they even get to me, I'm probably going to know someone's shooting a gun. It's crazy. Crazy.
Claiming that the house was haunted. They had known about the history of the home before moving in, but were reportedly undaunted by the tragedy, at least at first. By January, they claimed the house was infested with demonic forces. Now, this is where it starts to get weirder. After fleeing the home, through mutual friends, George and Kathy reached out to William Weber, Ron DeFeo Jr.'s lawyer. Weber began providing legal advice to the Lutzes. The young couple claimed that while living in the house, George mysteriously kept waking up at 3:15 a.m. every night. This was supposedly the time that Ronald DeFeo carried out his murders. What a coincidence. The couple also claimed that green slime oozed out of the walls, that doors kept opening and closing on their own, and that there was a demonic pig and a red glowing room in the house. The couple got so much media attention that paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, the couple that inspired the Conjuring cinematic universe, investigated the home and concluded that the house was indeed haunted. There was even a discovery that the house was once owned by a man named John Ketchum. Ketchum was believed to have been someone who practiced the dark arts. He was allegedly buried beneath the land the house was built on. This is where writer J. Anson enters the picture. According to Anson, he connected with George and Kathy Lutz after one of their friends walked into the Prentice Hall publishing house and asked how to get a book published. George and Kathy would tell Anson their story, which he put to paper.
I have to go back a little bit.
There was even a discovery that the house was once owned by a man named John Ketchum. Ketchum was believed to have been someone who practiced the dark arts. He was allegedly buried beneath the land.
John Ketchum. I'm actually going to do research right now. John Ketchum. The founding father of Brownstown, Indiana, Ketchum was famed for his military escapades against Native Americans. His father was supposedly held captive by Native Americans. He was awarded titles during his life, among them Honorable Colonel, the Judge Honorable from serving the state legislator. Ketchum was also a self-taught surveyor and building contractor, one of his most highly prized titles. However, is that when General Andrews' electors listed and... Okay, John Ketchum, also spelled Ketchum. Ketchum was a real man who existed in Amityville. He was born in Washington County, Maryland, in Daniel Ketchum and Keziah Pidgeman Lewis in May 1784. When John was two, his family moved from Maryland to Kentucky, settling down in Shelbyville. In 1803, John married Elizabeth Piercy and had 6 children in Kentucky, and another 6 in the Indiana Territory. He was self-taught surveyor, building contractor, and even judge. His official title, Colonel John Ketchum, was gained from his help in killing the Native Americans who were in Indiana Territory. He was also the founding father of Brownstown, Indiana, and given the title of General Andrews Jackson's elector in this... Oh, holy shit. So he did kill Native Americans. This particular John Ketchum is not known to have had any links to witchcraft. In November of 1974, Ronald DeFeo murdered... So there was... Okay, so it just said that is not known to have had any links to witchcraft. A man named John Ketchum was born in England. He was the second of 4 children, Edward Ketchum and Mary Hall. The family immigrated to Massachusetts when he was about 20 years old. He visited Salem, where he was made free via Salem court. One of the more notorious settlers who came to newly named Amityville in those days was John Ketchum, who had been forced out of Salem. Massachusetts was practicing witchcraft. John set up for residence within 500 feet of where George Lutz now lived, continuing his alleged devil worship. The account also claimed he was buried somewhere on the northeast corner of the property. So his body could still be out there somewhere. Holy shit, you learn something every day, don't you? And this is the quote I was thinking of from the remake of Amityville Horror. I just read about this man, Ketchum, who tortured Indians on my land in the basement. I read about how he slit his own throat so that his presence would live on forever. So he spread his own blood on the property so his presence would be on the property forever. I'm not sure if it's been proven to fact that he tortured Native Americans, but apparently he has murdered Native Americans. 2005 film version of the Amityville Horror contains a character, a cult preacher named Reverend Jeremiah Ketchum. So they did change his name for the purpose of the movie, and made him more evil, I guess. So he wasn't, like in the movie, he was absolutely... I mean, he wasn't a great person in real life too, but he was more evil and sickening in the remake of Amityville Horror. Like the way they painted him out was like he tortured Indians and he was just an evil man. Obviously, he still was not a solid dude though. Whose evil actions towards Native Americans in 17th century evil during his mission are said to be cause of the haunting of 112 Ocean Avenue. In the film, Reverend Ketchum slit his own throat as a part of the ritual that would allow him to live on forever in the house as a ghost, and his ghost reenacts his suicide in front of George Lutz, splashing blood all over him. This is a fictional speculation and is based loosely to claim made by parapsychologist Hans Holzer that had haunting is caused by Native Americans chief whose body was buried on the site of the property. Ketchum was also very well known for a family that lived in Amityville within the 18th century. Many historical buildings were owned by them and now museums in Amityville. However, surviving members claim that there was never a witch in the family. As to whether or not they owned the Ocean Avenue lot has been verified. Okay, so there was no actual guarantee he's ever done witchcraft or dark arts on the property, but it was assumed that he could have been doing that. Holy shit, just kind of blew my mind that there was a guy named John Ketchum who was based on, who inspired the character Jeremiah Ketchum, Reverend Jeremiah Ketchum in the remake of Amityville Horror. The more you know, the more you know. Wow. All right, let's get back into the video.
The house is built on. This is where writer J. Anson enters the picture. According to Anson, he connected with George and Kathy Lutz after one of their friends walked into the Prentice Hall publishing house and asked how to get a book published. George and Kathy would tell Anson their story, which he put to paper as the Amityville Horror. The novel quickly became a bestseller and, like many best-selling books, was optioned to become a film. All of this happened in less than 5 years after the DeFeo family met their demise. George and Kathy Lutz had been struggling financially when they moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. Not anymore. They were suddenly very wealthy and an international example of the paranormal being real. Yet, just as quickly as their paranormal star was on the rise, the flames of skepticism and revelations would begin to burn it all down. Before we get to that, we have to talk about the movie that was the climax of the Lutz's success. It also wound up putting a magnifying glass against their story, bringing to light the backdoor dealings that may have happened to bring about the film. Producer Samuel Z. Arkoff purchased the rights to Anson's novel, initially envisioning it as a made-for-TV film. Anson's original adaptation of his own novel was then rejected by Arkoff, who turned to screenwriter Sanders Stern instead. The producers originally hoped to film the movie in the actual real-life house, but the suburb of Amityville wasn't having it. The neighborhood denied American International Pictures permission to film any scenes whatsoever in Amityville. It would appear the suburb was attempting to distance itself from the unwanted publicity brought about by the murders and supernatural stories.
Yeah,
outdoor scenes were instead filmed in a different...
If you did something like that, I mean, you'd have people trying to go to that property all the time. People trying to get inside the house. I mean, windows getting broken, things like that. I mean, remember what happened to Bathsheba Sherman's grave after The Conjuring? And they didn't even use the real house, but people were starting to show up at the real house, the real location, and starting to pester the family who were living there at the time, who had no idea that the place was even, like, remotely haunted. There were people just randomly showing up, trying to take pictures in front of the house. You know, oh, I'm at the Conjuring house. I mean, Bathsheba Sherman's grave was desecrated because of the name that they put out for her. it's good that the townsfolk actually said, you know what, we're not going to allow this. This is not going to happen. It's kind of good. It's kind of good.
Different Dutch colonial home in Toms River, New Jersey. A third-floor facade was added, along with the infamous crescent moon windows that made the real Amityville home look menacing. All of the interior scenes were filmed at MGM Studios in Culver City, California. Hollywood magic indeed. This is the part where I usually bring up all the horrible happenings on the set of a film, especially one connected to such a ghastly story. But the biggest travesty of all, especially for the studio at the time, might be that there wasn't any extracurricular demonic set activity. Bummer. It definitely was not for lack of trying. In fact, in an interview years later, Margot Kidder, who played Kathy Lutz, said the producers wanted the cast and crew to claim there were strange happenings on set. But there weren't. It would seem the producers wanted to garner extra publicity via the paranormal. They may have been inspired by the series of real-life misfortunes.
And that is a big fear in the world today. People who think just like that. Actors called them out for what they were trying to do. Guys, you know, it didn't really happen, but do you mind telling a lie for us? Oh no, we'll get a lot of publicity from it. We'll get a lot of publicity. That's a serious issue. That happens all the time. That happens all the time. I'm really glad the actor said something about that.
Fortunes that plagued The Exorcist, which you'll learn about next week. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the cast and crew, the Amityville horror set was pretty normal during production. The worst thing that happened involved the gross scene with flies. Rod Steiger, who played Father Francis Delaney, had to have honey on his head to make the insects stick to him. Now that's dedication.
That's fucking awesome.
James Brolin would also claim in an interview years later that it took over 2 years for him to be cast in another role after playing George Lutz. He believed Hollywood typecasted him as a troubled and dangerous husband, when in actuality, the guy's just a damn good actor. And on top of all that normalcy, neither Brolin nor Kidder actually believed the Lutz's account of what happened in the house. And honestly, they had good reason not to. When the Amityville horror premiered, it was one of the earliest films to use the tagline, based on a true story. Even the description on the novel's back cover reads, "Their fantastic story, never before disclosed in full detail, makes for an unforgettable book with all the shocks and gripping suspense of The Exorcist, The Omen, or Rosemary's Baby, but with one vital difference. The story is true." The film would feed into viewers' curiosity of the paranormal in a big way. It became the highest-grossing independent film of all time, until 1990, when the record was usurped by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Love that film.
All this attention brought about an avalanche of damning revelations. The first was that the Lutzes intended to claim the house was haunted before they even moved in. Shortly after the Lutz family fled the premises, they called respected paranormal investigator Dr. Stephen Kaplan. Kaplan interviewed George Lutz and began to have doubts about the couple's story. In his book, The Amityville Horror Conspiracy, Kaplan detailed a conversation he had with George. In it, Mr. Lutz let it slip that he had been researching demonology and the occult before he moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. George had initially told Kaplan that he only looked into...
There was a video I watched, a documentary called My Amityville Horror. And it's basically George Lutz's and Kathy Lutz's, or Kathy Lutz's son, but George Lutz's stepson, talking about how much he hated George. As a matter of fact, he was like, every time the fact that George Lutz gets brought up, he laughs about it. Like, he can't help himself because he really did not care for him at all. And was just a guy that you just could not feel like was trying to be a father figure, I guess. He was just, what I'm hearing is not a good guy. Now, obviously, I'm not going to take everybody's, this person's word for it just automatically. I would need, hopefully more proof. Though I've heard by many people that George was not necessarily a great dude. And it was kind of coincidental that, of course, they move into this house that just had a tragedy. Most people, if it's pretty damn fresh that just happened, most people at least are aware of it because of the newspaper and the news. And yeah. So the fact that they apparently didn't know about it was kind of odd to me, that you wouldn't know about it. I don't know how things were back in the 70s, of course, so maybe I'm just unaware. Maybe I'm just clueless. But I've heard very interesting and not so convincing stories about George specifically. Not so much Kathy, not so much the rest of the family, but George specifically. And he did act like the guy who was in charge. Again, he would walk around apparently saying things like he was the Amityville horror guy. and he took very big pride in that. He could have orchestrated this whole thing for publicity.
To the occult after moving in and dealing with the strange happenings. In reality, Lutz had talked to Ray Buckland, a prominent witch in the area, nearly a year before moving into the house. Is that what you would call a premeditated haunting? The second, and perhaps most damning revelation, was that George and Kathy Lutz had originally been in cahoots with DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, and had always planned to do the book and movie with him. Remember that mention earlier of the Lutzes going to Weber for legal advice? Well, according to Weber, they were consulting over a lot more than that. After the success of the film, Weber sued for what he claimed was his rightful share of the profits from the book and film. According to Weber, when the Lutz couple reached out to him, he began giving them information concerning the DeFeo case to incorporate into their story about the haunted house. In a series of lawsuits that followed the film's release, a number of bombshells came out. In the case of Lutz versus Weber, it was revealed that George and Kathy were presented with a book contract by Weber after having consulted with him for some time. This contract would form a company consisting of Weber, the Lutzes, and writer Paul Hoffman, who would detail the Amityville hauntings and DeFeo's case. The Lutzes didn't like the contract, feeling they were getting too small a share of the profits. They went to J. Anson to write the book instead. Judge Weinstein, who presided over the case, was quoted as saying, "Based on what I have heard, it appears to me that to a large extent the book is a work of fiction, relying in large part upon suggestions of Mr. Weber." The two parties would end up settling out of court for an initially undisclosed amount that was eventually revealed to be $2,500. Later, in People magazine, Weber was quoted as saying that he knew the story was a hoax and that he and the Lutzes created this horror story over many bottles of wine. In 1992, Ronald DeFeo Jr. sought a new trial, claiming that Weber mishandled his case and made him plead insanity in order to make the story more attractive for a possible book and movie contract. The New York Times reported DeFeo saying,
"William Weber gave me no choice. He told me I had to do this. He told me there would be a lot of money from book rights and a movie. He would have me out in a couple of years and I would come into all that money. The whole thing was a con, except for the crime."
Of course, it's hard to trust a man who killed his entire family and then proceeded to change his initial story a number of times.
You can't trust a guy. Even if that is 100% true, you should not trust the guy. Just in general. Anything that comes out of that guy's mouth, in my opinion, is just load garbage. Anything he says, anything he wants to try to prove a point. He really tries to twist things in his own narrative a lot. I've noticed with interviews from Ronald DeFeo, Ronald DeFeo Jr., he tried to twist a lot of things to work for his own perspective. Like, he started talking to a bunch of interviewers who pretty much were saying they think that the house was haunted, and he was going along with that story, and then he was going along with the story of how they were conning him and all that stuff, which honestly is kind of sounding to be more true than the actual haunting of the property. I have a lot of respect for the Amityville house, of course, I do. I always do have a lot of respect for any of these locations, but it all felt too coincidental. It all felt too perfect with this whole scenario with the Amityville horror house, and the fact that, George Lutz was studying the occult and whatnot beforehand, and then they so happened to move into the house where a pretty fresh murder just happened, and then all of a sudden, all this paranormal stuff started happening. I mean, and look, the stepson apparently said that there was paranormal stuff happening. Maybe there was. I don't know. But with George being at the helm of it, it makes it very much hard to believe, because I'm not sure if I really do trust George Lutz much at all. And, I'm not trying to disrespect the guy. I know he's passed away now. He's long gone. But of course, watching interviews with the guy, him smiling on, some of these interviews and whatnot, going on television and talking the way he did, and just going about how he did things, just was not really a convincing, I just experienced hell on earth kind of demeanor, right? Does sound like this was his plan from the beginning when he got that house, was to try to publicize off it and to gain a lot of fortune and profit. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody who believes in a story, but to me, the Lutz situation just does not feel legitimate, if I had to be honest.
The thing is,
but then again, it never really has. There was a part of my life that actually did believe some of it, and unfortunately, I just think it was them totally taking advantage of the situation.
Weber would take the stand again in state Supreme Court to be questioned by DeFeo's new legal team, and he essentially corroborated DeFeo's story. Weber testified that George and Kathy Lutz met with him after living in the Amityville house because they were interested in, and I quote, developing the demonism aspect of the case. That is so sketch. The Lutzs would attempt to countersue Weber for him claiming their story was a hoax. Their case was thrown out. No other paranormal happenings have occurred at the residence since the Lutzs left. In fact, the address of the original house was changed from 112 Ocean Avenue to 108 Ocean Avenue as to deter horror tourists from bothering the current residents. The Amityville Horror made history with its box office success, but one could argue that the hype around the movie came from the idea that the happenings were real. And even if it wasn't real, that at least the people it happened to believed it was. All of that was a lie, completely undermining the experience of watching something based on a true story. Not to mention, what gets lost in all of this is the fact that real people were killed, and they seem like almost an afterthought in the quest to put some paranormal spin on it all. There's definitely a hellish story concerning 112 Ocean Avenue, but it's more to do with the horrors of greed, legal malpractice, and a quest for fame no matter the price. The Amityville Horror may not have been held to make, but devilish dealings were certainly involved. I'm Chauncey K. Robinson, and this has been Production Tales from Hell. Stay creepy out there.
That was cool. I like it. I like this episode a lot. Now, I knew a lot of the sketchiness, some of the sketchiness that was going on behind the scenes of the whole Amityville situation, and it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. It's people like this that make it very difficult to trust anybody in the paranormal field anymore, because they know exactly what people do when they hear paranormal stories. They know what they go for. They know. People don't want to acknowledge it, but people profit off of this shit, and they know long beforehand. George Lutz, apparently a couple years ago, was studying the occult. He knew. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you guys truly believe in the real story of the Amityville horror house? Not the DeFeo stuff, which unfortunately did happen. There were people who were murdered on it in that property. So that is a real part of the history, that, yes, a family was actually shot to death in that house. And there was apparently a man by the name of John Ketchum, who did live on the property and supposedly could have been involved with witchcraft, though it was never confirmed that it was, nor the family ever believed that he was involved. So take that with a grain of salt, as you should. The house, the property was completely taken advantage of, and the history was taken advantage of, and they jumped on it. They jumped on it and tried to make a fortune. Let me know what you guys think down below. This is the kind of shit. This is the kind of shit that annoys me about the paranormal field right here. If anything gets under my skin about the paranormal field, it's the fact that they go after the real stories and they show so much disrespect to what really happened to real people. And all they think about is greed. That's all they think about is that money. We'll be set for life after this. Horrible. Horrible. All right, guys, let me know what you guys think down below. And until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Get this video to 100 likes and I'll react to another one. Thank you guys so much.
JCARTSARTS is throwing down, coming after all these paranormal clowns. He's watching, not letting get away. On his fake stars, tearing the fakers apart. Lead with his heart, no one dare tell him can't react, because JCARTS has your back. JCARTSARTS has your back. JCARTSARTS is throwing down, coming after me if you can't. JCARTSARTS is through.